$200,000. That's the number a company once put on a human life. Not an estimate, not a guess, a line item. This is the file where they wrote it down. It wasn't supposed to leave the building. For years, it didn't. This is Rivent, and this is the memo that priced a life. 1968. American car companies are watching something they didn't expect. Small, cheap, efficient imports from Japan and Germany eating into a market they thought belonged to them. Ford's answer is a car called the Pinto, and the man pushing it forward wants it built fast. The plan is simple, on paper. Keep it under 2,000 pounds. Keep it under $2,000. And have it on dealership lots by the fall of 1970? A deadline that can't move, no matter what testing turns up along the way. September 11th, 1970. That's the date circled on the calendar. To hit it, the tooling for the car's body, its shape, its structure, where every part sits, has to be locked in almost 2 years earlier, before crash testing is even finished. Here's why that matters. Once tooling is committed, changing the design isn't a redesign anymore. It's a teardown. Every week of delay costs money. Every structural change costs more. So the fuel tank goes exactly where the early drawings put it, just behind the rear bumper, with almost nothing standing between the two. The assembly lines start moving. The car goes into production exactly on schedule, exactly as promised. By the time the Pinto launches, import sales have crossed 13% of the American market. Ford needed a win, and on the surface, they got one. The Pinto becomes one of the best-selling cars in the country. But somewhere in that rush to hit a date on a calendar, a question never gets asked out loud. What happens if this design is wrong? Here's the part most people don't know. In 1970, there is no federal law requiring a car's fuel system to survive a rear-end collision. Standard number 301 exists, but only for frontal impacts. A rear impact requirement is being discussed. It is not yet law. It won't be for 6 more years. So understand what that means. The Pinto isn't breaking a rule. There isn't one yet. Ford isn't hiding a violation. They're operating in a gap, and that gap is exactly what makes what happens next so uncomfortable. Because a company doesn't need a law to know a fuel tank sitting unprotected behind a rear bumper is a risk. They need a law to be forced to fix it. On one side, a car already on the road, already selling. On the other, a regulation still years from taking effect. 2 timelines moving at completely different speeds. And in 1973, they're about to collide. This is the file, 3 sections. Design and testing, cost analysis, legal and regulatory. This is the memo Ford's own people wrote to decide whether a life was worth the price of a fix. Ford's own pre-production crash tests found the answer to the question nobody asked out loud. In a rear-end collision at speeds as low as 20 miles an hour, the kind of impact that happens every day at intersections and on-ramps, and that most passengers walk away from, the fuel tank could rupture. Crash test result, fuel tank rupture at 20 miles an hour, rear impact. That's not a freak accident scenario. That's an ordinary Tuesday. Somewhere inside Ford, an engineer reads that result. We don't know what they thought. We only know what happened to the paper afterward. 20 miles an hour. Write that number down. You're going to need it in a minute. The gap between the bumper and the tank is small. Small enough that in a low-speed collision, there's almost nothing to absorb the impact before it reaches the fuel. It's not a hidden flaw. It's a visible one, if you know where to look. Here is the calculation, in Ford's own numbers. 180 deaths, valued at $200,000 each. 180 serious burn injuries, valued at $67,000 each. 2,100 vehicles burned, valued at $700 each, added up. And the projected cost of doing nothing, the cost of every death, every injury, every burned car, comes to $49.5 million. $200,000. That's not a number Ford invented from nothing. It came from a federal cost formula used elsewhere for other purposes. What's different here is what they did with it. They picked up a tool built for broad policy decisions and used it to decide whether one specific fix on one specific car was worth making. Now look at the other side of the ledger. Fixing the fuel tank, a simple, well-understood modification, would have cost $11 per vehicle. Across every car and light truck that shared the design, that's $121 million. Implementation costs far outweigh the expected benefits. $121 million against $49.5 million. By the math on the page, the decision writes itself. It's just that the math doesn't have a word for what 180 of those numbers actually were. Somewhere in a room like this one, that math got approved. 1972. A Pinto driven by a woman named Lily Gray stalls on a California freeway. It's rear-ended. The fuel tank ruptures. The car catches fire. Lily Gray dies from her injuries. Her 13-year-old passenger, Richard Grimshaw, survives, with severe, permanently disfiguring burns. The case goes to trial as Grimshaw versus Ford Motor Company. 6 months in an Orange County courtroom. The jury doesn't just hear about a car crash. They hear about a memo. The verdict? $125 million in punitive damages. A trial judge later reduces it to $3.5 million. But by then the number has already done its damage to Ford's reputation. 1977. A journalist named Mark Dowie publishes an investigation in Mother Jones. Its title, Pinto Madness. For the first time, Ford's own cost-benefit numbers reached the public. 8 years after the Pinto's launch, 6 years after the memo was written, Ford recalls 1.5 million Pintos and 30,000 Mercury Bobcats built on the same design. June 9th, 1978. That same year, in Indiana, a grand jury does something no one has done to a major American automaker before. They indict Ford on charges of reckless homicide. Ford is acquitted in March of 1980. But the indictment alone had already made its point. A corporation's internal math had become a matter for a criminal court, not just a civil one. 1968, 1970, 1973, 1976, 1977, 1978. 6 years between a memo and a recall. Every single one of those years, the car stayed on the road. Today, cost-benefit safety analyses still happen inside companies, every single day. What changed is where they happen, and who's allowed to see them. A calculation like this one, run today, is far more likely to be routed through legal counsel from the very first draft. Specifically so that if it's ever written down, it's protected by attorney-client privilege and harder to pull into a courtroom. The math didn't disappear. It just learned how to stop leaving a paper trail. The engineers who wrote this memo weren't monsters. They were following a spreadsheet. And that's what makes it worse. Ford wasn't some fringe operation. It was one of the most ordinary, trusted names in the country, a brand sitting in driveways coast to coast, which is what makes this hard to sit with. If a company that ordinary could run this calculation once, what else has been weighed the same way since? Not just in Ford's past, but in the cars being built today. What else do you think they're hiding? A defect they haven't recalled yet? A safety feature they quietly cut to save money? Or maybe it's something scarier. In 2015, researchers took full control of a Jeep on a live highway, cutting the brakes and the engine from 10 miles away. It forced a recall of 1.4 million vehicles. What do you think is still out there that hasn't made headlines yet? Tell us in the comments. Like and subscribe if you want that story told next. This is Rivent. The files are real. What you do with them is up to you.